Hey there, I'm Brandon, and this is the Dirt Church Devotional. You know, throughout the Bible, there's a lot of name changes. So, Matthew was called Levi. Jesus changed Simon's name to Peter. You got, Jacob becomes Israel, and Abram becomes Abraham. But there's one that caught me off guard the other day, and it wasn't that the name was changed. I just noticed something that I hadn't noticed before. It was in Genesis chapter 17, verse 15, and the Lord said this to Abraham. He says, "You are no longer to call Sarai, your wife Sarai. Her name shall be Sarah." Well, that's interesting. So I did a little bit of a dive on the different meanings of Sarai and Sarah, and I found this out. Commentators are kind of confused, and Bible scholars are kind of confused, because Sarai means my princess, and Sarah simply means princess, more in a generic form. They're really kind of interchangeable. And so I got to thinking about it. I thought, no, here's the reality. This is what was different. Every single translation except for one that I've looked through, I think it was the New Living, was different. Anyway, every other translation says this: "You shall no longer call her Sarai, but Sarah." Think about this for a minute. What God was saying is, Abraham, you've been viewing your wife wrong for a while. You need to change the way you think about her. You need to change the way you refer to her. Why? Because change begins at home. Change in the heart, change with life, change spiritually. All these things, really, they begin at home. And look at Abraham's past. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of people out there that want to argue that the Bible is patriarchal, that it's gender biased, that, male dominated, blah, blah, blah. There is a lot of that. I mean, even Abraham was guilty of that, okay? But here's the beautiful thing. God doesn't hide their mistakes. He doesn't hide the mistakes of the quote-unquote heroes, but he shows them to show that he can work all things for good. He can take that what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. And so early on, Abraham has this promise, but he's really self-centered, and he's telling his wife Sarah, "Hey, look, if you really love me, tell everybody that I'm your brother, so they don't kill me." And furthermore, he's encouraged, he's emboldened that this promise is simply going to be through him. When he doesn't have a kid for 10 years or so after the promise, and his wife gives him Hagar, and Hagar gets pregnant. Hey, obviously, Abraham's an old man, but he's still virile. He can still get things done. It's Sarai's fault. It's Sarai's problem. And even when God promises a son to Abraham to pass on the covenant blessing, Abraham says, "Oh, no, just let your blessing fall on Ishmael." Like, hey, you know what, Lord? It's all about me. I've got a kid already. God says, "No, I'll bless Ishmael because he's your son, but there's going to be one born through Sarai." And by the way, you stop calling her Sarai. She's not your piece of property. She's not, your possession. She is a princess. And you start treating her as such. Peter tells us, husbands, that we need to live with respect and consideration with our wives so that our prayers aren't hindered. So apparently, the way that we treat our spouse has a big effect on the way that we get treated by God. Now, that's kind of a tough one. And by the way, ladies, don't think that this is a one-way street. Because, husbands, love your wives, but wives, respect or honor your husbands. And it doesn't say husbands, love your wives if they're lovable, or wives, honor your husbands if they're honorable. It just says, do this. And so we have a responsibility towards our spouses. But you know what? If you're not married, you still have a responsibility. What about your children? Fathers, don't exasperate your children, but raise them up in the fear and knowledge of the Lord. If you don't have a spouse and you don't have kids, start looking at your other close relationships, your siblings, your parents, your close friends. We have a responsibility in a way that we view them. And here's the challenge from me to you, and I believe from Scripture, to you and me. Let's start seeing those around us the way that God sees them. All right? Let's start treating them the way He wants them treated, which kind of goes back to that old golden rule. Do to others what you'd have them do to you. Are you treating others the way you want to be treated? Are you viewing your spouse or your kids or your closest relationships the way God would have you do so? Chew on that. We'll talk to you next time.